companies in this country and make all 72 vaccines that are mandated to our children. And all 4 of them are serial felons. These are the companies that created the opioid epidemic, and it kills as many kids every year as died in the 20-year Vietnam War.
Wow.
56,000 kids last year. Those 4 companies in the last 10 years have been convicted or made settlements to felony charges and paid $35 billion in damages collectively and penalties for falsifying science, for lying to regulators, for deceiving doctors, for blackmailing, bribing, for killing hundreds of thousands of people. Vioxx killed 500,000 people.
Wow.
It was on a headache pill that Merck knew was going to cause heart attacks and didn't tell anybody. And they knew how many it was going to kill, and they said, we're still going to make more money on it, so we're going to market it. This is Merck. Now, how is it that the Democratic politicians in this country can say, yes, these are homicidal companies. They lie, they cheat, they falsify science, they do it with every product they have except vaccines. And the only way that they got, is this working?
No.
Did they cut me off?
They can't cut you off. Someone help them. Oh, come on.
Put the freak.
You're going to see?
Take this one. Yes. Turn it on.
Keep going.
Keep going.
Keep going.
F.Kennedy. This is great.
We didn't know all these ways on it. They shut you down. No, it's not working. Let them speak. 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 Let them speak.
Not me. I want him to talk to me for another 2 hours, but it's not me. But he said that he'll pay the money to keep it going. So, but we should have a phone call in the morning.
Your legacy will live forever in our children. And because of that, because he's willing to pay it out of pocket, we shall all donate to Children's Health Defense.
Hi guys, my name is Kasia Gutierrez. I work with the church in the rentals department. This event, unfortunately, is over. I'm sorry, but you need to start clearing out the room.
Censorship.
This room is over capacity. There are many people standing. If something
Take
were
my
to
chair.
happen, the church will get fined.
Censorship.
Well, I mean, that's... I'm sure we can go outside. That's what I'm told. Okay. It's not me. I'm sorry. Okay.
Guys, Bobby's going to speak.
Those are your talking points?
Bobby's trying to stand on the chairs.
Yeah.
He's a freedom angel.
He's not afraid of heights.
Nope, he's a freedom angel on the chairs.
Street restaurant.
Thank
here.
you. Thank you.
Their chicken and their cookies.
Thank you.
I want to thank all of you for coming and for
Thank
being
you.
here. And New York State and California have both done something that's really quite extraordinary.
Bobby is now
They did it vice versa. California and the religious and philosophical exemptions in 2015, and this year they got rid of the medical exemptions. In this state, and in California, we now have a situation that is unprecedented, where a doctor who knows a child, who's examined the medical records of that child, who understands the family, and in many cases has known the family since that child was born. There's about 5,000 or 6,000 of those kids in this state whose doctors have told them, you cannot get a vaccine because you had a seizure in an earlier vaccine, because there's a history of seizures in your family, because you have eczema, which for 40 years CDC said is a contraindication for vaccination, because you have food allergy, because you have autoimmune diseases. You cannot get a vaccine. It may kill you, it may sicken you and disable you for life. And now the state of New York is saying, we are going to step between that doctor and that child. And we are going to tell that child, it doesn't matter what your doctor told you. We're going to force you to get that vaccine anyway. Or you can't exercise your constitutional right to get a public education. And think about what this means. That doctor is no longer has that medical relationship that is 2,500 years old since Hippocrates. The relationship between a doctor and a patient has always meant that the doctor will act for the good and on behalf of that patient. You can share with him things in secret. The law recognizes this. There's a privilege. And we want people to have that relationship, to trust their doctor. And now that 2,500-year-old relationship has been disrupted. That doctor is no longer the agent for that child. That doctor is the agent for state policy. He is acting, he is being told, you cannot act for the good of that child. You cannot exercise your medical judgment to save that child's life. You must act on behalf of the state. You are an agent of state policy. You are acting for the greater good. What does that mean? Where does it end? Do we end up like they have in China? Or your doctor can tell you, you've had too many children, you need to get an abortion for the good of the state? You know, in this country, 80% of medical costs are spent in the last year of life. Wouldn't it be better if we just got rid of all those old people for the good of the country? Shouldn't their doctors be telling them, sorry, but I need to put you down to save money for the good of the state? Oh, this is a dramatic change in the relationship between a doctor and a patient. And you know, what we're seeing already in this state is that children are being injured by it. And you know, I've never been anti-vaccine. I'm called anti-vaccine because it's another way to shut me up. What I've said is very reasonable. Let's test the vaccines. That's all we want. Let's test them. And if they do what they say they do, and that's fine. We all want them. We don't have to be forced to take them. Everybody wants to have good health. If they test a vaccinated group and an unvaccinated group, and the vaccinated group is healthier, all of us want to get vaccinated. They don't need to force us. You can just show us the science. And we'll say you'd be stupid not to take a vaccine because you're going to be a healthier human being. Why is it that they won't test them? Of the 72 vaccines that are now mandated for our children, not a single one has ever been tested against a placebo. And that's the only way that we can know whether that vaccine is actually averting more problems than it's causing. The reason for that is because the CDC is an artifact of the legacy of CDC as a public health services, which was a quasi-military organization. That's why many people at CDC have military ranks, like Surgeon General. And the vaccine program was conceived as a defense against a biological attack on our country. They wanted to make sure that if Russia attacked us with anthrax, that we could quickly develop a vaccine and deploy it without regulatory impediments. They said if we call it a medicine, we're going to have to test it like all other medicines. So let's call it something else. We'll call it a biologic, and we won't have to test them. Well, biologics under American law are immune from getting tested. That means that you have a product that is zero liability to you no matter how badly injured you are, no matter how toxic the ingredient, no matter how negligent the company, you cannot sue a vaccine company. So they have no incentive to make it safe. Not only that, but they don't have to test it at the outset. They get rubber stamped and put it in the system, and now it's mandated. Well, how did we in the United States of America get into a position where, and the Democratic Party, who believes that it's okay to force coercively American citizens to undergo a medical procedure with untested medicines for which there is no incentive for that company to make it safe. And that's where we are in our country, and it's the Democratic Party, now my party that I grew up in, that I love, that is doing, it's kind of a mass psychosis that we're seeing. The Democrats are supposed to be listening to women, right? Didn't we all agree on that?
Yes.
And why is it now that they're saying, well, in this case, the women are just wrong?
Yeah.
There's 250,000 women in this country who say, I was pro-vaccine, I gave a vaccine like you told me to my child, and my child disappeared 2 months later. You know, I grew up in a world where that didn't happen. Nobody was ever scared that their child, a perfectly normal child who exceeded all milestones, was suddenly going to become mentally retarded when they're 2 years old or 18 months old. That never happened. I grew up on the cutting edge of intellectual disabilities. My family started Special Olympics. I was working in Special Olympics from when I was 8 years old. We never saw a kid with true autism. We never saw it. They say today, oh, it's always been with us. That's what they have to say, because if they didn't say that, then they'd have to say something's causing it, and we better start looking at what it is. It's got to be an environmental toxin. All of the institutions in our society that were constructed to protect a little child, an innocent, vulnerable little child, from a greedy corporation have been completely neutralized. The Congress is taking more money, double the money from vaccine makers that it takes from any other industry, which is oil and gas is the next biggest, double oil and gas, 4 times defense and aerospace. The regulatory agencies, CDC and FDA, are captive agencies. They are sock puppets for the industry that they're supposed to regulate. They are vaccine companies. And CDC has a $11.5 billion budget. $5 billion of that is buying and distributing vaccines. And the tail is wagging the dog. How can a regulatory agency, they own vaccine patents.
They can.
FDA, NIH own vaccine patents. Every time a vial of Gardasil is sold, they make money. Not only does the agency make money, but individuals in the agency, high-level officials,
That should be legal.
who worked on that vaccine can collect $150,000 a year in royalties. Well, how is that a regulatory agency? This is like, you know, I've been suing EPA for years and saying they're a captive agency, they're working for the coal companies. But at least they're not making half of their budget selling coal. What would happen if they were doing that? It's like, it's agency capture on steroids. They have completely disabled the press. This autism epidemic and the epidemic of chronic diseases that we have in this country is a symptom of a disease of media malpractice. These companies, these media companies, they call themselves journalists that are supposed to be the front line for American democracy, informing the public. Instead, they're supporting censorship. They've appointed themselves the gatekeepers of dangerous information. They're telling Americans, you cannot afford to hear this information, so we're going to make sure you don't. And it's not just a coincidence that their biggest advertisers of the evening news are vaccine companies. Roger Ailes told me that on Fox News and on his news show, on average, there were 22 ads and 17 of those were pharmaceutical companies. Anderson Cooper and Aaron Burnett are sponsored by Pfizer. How humiliating is that? Lester Holt is sponsored by Merck. And those companies are buying those ads. They're not only getting advertising for their product, but they're able to dictate content to those media organizations. And, you know, and so we've got, and then the other institutions, so you've got rid of Congress, you got rid of the elected officials, you got rid of the regulators, you got rid of the press, and what they have to get rid of now? The lawyers. And they did that, as they passed FICA, which made it so that you cannot sue a vaccine company, no matter how egregious your injury, no matter how toxic the product, no matter how sloppy the line protocols, no matter how negligent the manufacturer, you cannot sue them for your injury. So the lawyers and the courts are gone. And then you have the doctors, who are supposed to be at least the frontline protectors, but the doctors, as we know, sadly, are also compromised. They're making, pediatricians are now making 50% of their incomes on their vaccines.
Yep.
And then the last stage of defense are the parents.
Yeah.
And that's why they're passing these exceptions.
Yeah.
To remove the parents so that that greedy company can have direct access to force your child to take that product. And how anti-American is that? How, you know, how against all of our values? The Democratic Party is supposed to be the party that stands up against censorship.
Now they're communists.
Instead, they're demanding censorship. They're supposed to be the party that stands up for women. And yet, you know, this orthodoxy that they have endorsed, it begins with misogyny. It begins with the conscious choice that you have to ignore the hundreds of thousands of mothers who say, I gave that vaccine to my child and my child got sick. And instead, you have to believe the vaccine companies. And you know, I grew up, my father telling us, you've got to always question authority. People in power lie.
Yes.
That's what they do. And yet, that's what the Democratic Party was about. We don't want big agglomerations of power because they abuse power. And it's just human nature. And it's, you know, and it's not something that we should consider unusual. What's unusual is the Democratic Party is saying, don't listen to the moms, don't listen to the women, listen to the big corporations who are making $50 billion a year on this product. Not only making $50 billion on selling you the vaccine, they're making $500 billion selling the drugs for the chronic disease the vaccines are causing. ADD, ADHD, speech delay, language delay, tics, ASD, autism, Tourette's syndrome, rheumatoid arthritis, diabetes, lupus, etc., demyelinating diseases. We have the allergic disease like food allergies, peanut allergy. I had 11 brothers and sisters, about 70 cousins. None of them had food allergies.
Exactly. Yeah.
Why do all my kids have food allergies?
Yeah.
Oh, what? So all of these diseases, you'll find them listed in two places. And CDC says, if you were born prior to 1989, your chance of having a chronic disease is 12%. If you were born after 1989, your chance of having a chronic disease is 54%.
That's unacceptable.
This is the sickest generation in American history. And if you list all of those diseases, those chronic diseases, there's two lists that you'll find them on. One, a list of the diseases that have become epidemic since we changed the vaccine schedule in 1989. And two, the manufacturer's insert for the vaccines. And the top drugs at Merck and Pfizer and Sanofi and Glaxo are selling right now, their biggest blockbuster drugs other than Gardasil and the MMR, are all drugs that treat diseases that are listed as chronic diseases caused by vaccines on their vaccine inserts. Now, what are we going to do about it?
What are we going to do about it?
All of the institutions that are supposed to protect children from these greedy corporations have been disabled, except the courts. We don't have access to the courts like we used to. We ought to have, if somebody injures your child with any other product, you can sue them and you can get a lawyer and you can get it in front of a judge. It's in our Constitution, in the 6th Amendment and the 7th Amendment. Somebody hurts you, we have a constitutional right to jury trial, as long as it's not a vaccine company. The vaccine companies, you can't sue them for defective product. But there are other ways that you can sue. And we have figured those ways out. You can sue them for committing fraud. And we can document that from here to kingdom come, a fraud. And you can sue them if they lied about an effect. And we can sue them for that too. So for the first time in 15 years, we've now assembled lawyers who are, because the law, the bar, the plaintiff's bar stayed away from this issue for many, many years. After I'm Arizona, a lot of the firms almost went bankrupt. They wouldn't get into it. But we figured out ways that they can get a path for those attorneys to make money suing these companies. And I'm not going to talk about a lot of details, but I'm going to tell you that you should have hope. You should have hope from that. We are going to beat them. We're going to sue them, and we're going to win. AF created.
Rainbow.
Oh, I see now.
Fraud upon fraud upon fraud upon fraud, and it's so high and it's so unwieldy that all you have to do is kick out a single brick and the whole thing's going to crumble. And all of these reporters who wouldn't let us on TV and all of these places that throw us out and silence us are suddenly going to have to rethink their worldview. And maybe it will end up doing something for our democracy and for generations of children. And you cannot trust corporations to run this country. And, you know, corporations are great things. They allow big agglomerations of wealth, and they get people to risk it, and they improve our economy. They should not be running our government, because corporations are not patriotic. They don't act on behalf of America. They don't act on behalf of the health of our children.
Right.
They act to make their shareholders richer, and that's the only thing they care about.
Follow the money.
And we need to understand that, and that's okay. It's not okay if they're running our government. And that's what they're doing today. And we need to take the government away from them, and we are going to do that. And we're going to do it through the courts, and we're going to do it on the streets. We can't do it, and we have none of the institutions that are supposed to protect us. We have people. And we are growing, and this movement is growing. And every time they hit us, every time they silence us, we get louder. Every time they try to cut us down, we get bigger. And every time they try to weaken us, we get stronger. And I want to thank all of